The other side, I think we would say the other side of the abortion conversation.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Yeah. Yes. We were just talking about something else here. Actually, why don't we say something? Alan Fung, the mayor of Cranston, is going to the Ethics Commission to get approval to be able to do part-time work filling in for a host on WPRO. Hey, Alan, don't take any money. Do it for free. You won't have to. You don't need an ethics vote. You know? Do it for the good of the people. It's a subcontractor. Anyway, we'll dig into that tomorrow when we can pull up the headline, but Anita just caught it. And we're loose here. You know that. It's Monday night. Nice to have you aboard. Thank you very much for tuning in to this extravaganza known as My State of Mind, which is, you never know. Professor Hilary Friedman is here tonight. She doubles in her life. Well, she's got 3 or 4 little roles, right? She's a mom. She has a professorship at Brown University, and she, because she's a glutton for punishment, has taken on the presidency of the National Organization for Women here in Rhode Island. The abortion conversation is one that neither one of us really like to have a discussion on, but it's something that has been front and center here in Rhode Island, and I think we need to have at least the pro-choice side that advocates for this legislation. We haven't had that here yet, and it's important to do it, don't you think? In the meantime, check this headline out. What is that all supposed to be? This is a really interesting take, and of course Stephanopoulos has really been in the undies of the president with a 30-hour saga. Let's roll the package from CBS.
President Trump has fired 3 pollsters following the leak of internal polling to news organizations. The polls from March show the president losing to former Vice President Joe Biden in key 2020 battleground states. The president denied it during an interview with ABC News.
My polls show that I'm winning everywhere.
I don't know. We've all seen these reports that with 15 out of 17 states, you spent $2 million on a poll and you're behind in 15 out of 17 states.
Nobody showed you those polls because those polls don't exist, George.
But in a statement to CBS News, the Trump campaign acknowledged the polls are real. However, it calls them incomplete and misleading, saying they represent a worst-case scenario for voter turnout. As the president prepares to kick off his 2020 campaign Tuesday, Democrats are sizing up their field to see who would match up best against him. In a CBS News Battleground Tracker poll, 78% of Democrats in early voting states say beating Trump is the most important issue in their choice.
Democrats are almost singularly focused on finding somebody they think can beat President Trump. But as they game that out, Joe Biden's supporters really think that he can beat the president, and that's a big reason why he's on top.
Former Vice President Biden is the first choice among Democrats in the CBS News survey, followed by Senators Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Kamala Harris.
I have to tell you, on this whole poll thing, the president tells George Stephanopoulos that the polls don't exist. Hours later, his campaign staff says, yeah, they exist, but we popped 3 people. Oh, okay. Well, what did that do to rectify the situation? I'd be careful getting cocky if you're a Democrat, by the way, about these polls, because the electability thing that Democrats say they want so much is a thing that they ought to keep focus on. You get 2 left with a Democratic primary winner, you have another Donald Trump presidency. You have 4 more years. And I'm not sure, so Bernie can't beat him. Just Bernie can't beat him. Elizabeth Warren is an interesting character because she does speak in progressive tone, but she really talks about family finance a lot. And I think that has a resonating chance. But the truth is that if she's personified as a socialist Democrat, she ain't going to win either. Joe Biden probably is the guy. And sooner or later, these 20 candidates plus are going to have to fold underneath and make a real charge, or you're not going to get what you think is easily coming according to these polls. Do not be fooled by them. In the meantime, on the Rhode Island budget, it's $9.9 billion and change, rounding it to $10 billion, right? I heard the Speaker of the House, who was here recently today on WPRO, talking about the idea that, I don't like the idea that we spend all this money either, but I don't think it's fair that people just say it's too much. Tell us what we need to cut and we'll take a good hard look at it, which is a way of saying, yeah, I'd love to go on a date with you. You should call me sometime, but lose my number. It's what is that all about? If we had a serious conversation about budget around this state, we'd be talking about philosophy. We'd be talking about the things that we believe that the public should fund. Zero base our thinking process, and then we come out with a number. That's a much better way to give input to the Speaker of the House. If you do, give him a ring. Talk about philosophy, not about what shouldn't be paid for from the top down. It's a harder exercise, by the way. And finally, no recreational pot in Rhode Island, so we're going to triple the number of dispensaries for medical marijuana use, which is stupid. It's just stupid. It's just, there'll be all sorts of pro formas out there that suggest to you that that's something we need. No, it's just stupid. It sidesteps the debate. It's something, why couldn't they just say, we just want to wait. We need some more data from Colorado. Massachusetts doesn't seem to be singing tunes up there about what they've done. We'll wait. No, instead they do this because they have to do something. Because they're legislators. They have to do something. What they have to understand is they weren't elected necessarily to do something. Some people elected them to do nothing. And then there's the abortion bill. Shenanigans with the bill, it's in judiciary, and then it gets moved to Health and Human Services because we've got a Republican coup. And did you follow all the play-by-play on that? Were you hanging around?
I was there.
All the minutia?
Yes.
Yeah. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Speaker of the Senate President, all he had to do was become ex officio, and he could have voted to send that bill to the floor from the judiciary. Did everybody follow this? We'll fill you in on the details in the next segment. But he didn't want to be on record supporting anything around abortion. So the Republicans, even though they were sloppy in the way we were doing it physically in the room, they kind of got him. And then the chess match continued, and they moved it to another committee. This week, it'll be on the floor. What do you project? Have you been polling? Have you been lobbying? What have you been doing?
Well, the Rhode Island Coalition for Reproductive Freedom, who I'm here representing today in my capacity with Rhode Island Now, we feel cautiously optimistic about the Senate floor vote this week. But, the Senate president, while he's very clear that he's not going to vote for this bill, he's also said this is a good piece of legislation and it really deserves a full debate on the Senate floor. And he was very involved.
Yeah, a good piece of legislation that he would vote
transfer.
against. A good piece of legislation that he would vote against.
Well, it's a well-vetted bill. It's been discussed. It's been worked on by many people. And so it deserves a full debate and vote by the entire Senate.
All right. When we come back, we'll explain, if you haven't been paying attention, the details of it in further in-depth analysis. Stay with us. So if you weren't paying attention, that's okay. 5-yard penalty. Here's what the Eyewitness News reported last week.
Protesters chanting outside the Senate President's office after the Health and Human Services Committee sent reproductive rights legislation to the Senate floor.
It took some effort to get it to the floor. I think also there has been a national movement that has been designed to provide misinformation about what abortion and reproductive rights actually mean. It is very hard to challenge that narrative.
8 of the committee's 9 regular members voted in favor of the bill that preserves abortion rights up to fetal viability.
I would simply say that if you are not in favor of an abortion, don't have one.
It's abortion on demand when demanded, and I object to it.
Republican Senator Elaine Morgan, the minority whip, joined the committee in what's called an ex officio capacity so that she could vote no, but first tried 3 times to make a motion to send the bill back to the Judiciary Committee, which had transferred the bill to health care earlier this week. No one seconded her motion.
Abortion is not health care. It's anti-health care, and it's the murder of a baby.
If I were asked to give advice about a young woman having a baby, I would certainly give them alternatives to having an abortion.
Senator Elizabeth Crowley says she's pro-life but voted in favor of the bill because she says it's not an expansion of abortion rights and deserves a full floor vote.
There is no expansion. There is no 9-month abortion, which I would be totally against.
Yeah, and most pro-choice people are not supportive of late-term abortions, and I think the reality, you know, I'm a stated pro-life guy, right? So if I'm the Senate President or I'm the Speaker of the House, I vote no, but I probably play it the same way they do because the issue is so contemporary, meaning it's just such a, you know, we have a 50-year precedence. If there's something to be debated about it, then I think it's risen to the high level of importance on both sides. If it needs to be revisited, we'll talk about that in our next segment, if it really did need to be revisited. Fine. I just wish that we had that kind of political leadership on other things that the Speaker and the Senate President would vote no on to let things come through. And you made a good point during the break. Marriage equality was one of them, right? Where Senate President Teresa Paiva-Weed voted no, but let it come, understanding that it was, I don't know, is contemporary the right word? What's the word I'm looking for, Professor? It's real time. It's in our lives. It's of the moment. Right. It really is. It's a thing there. What did you learn about the legislative process this time around? You're a student of it in your role as a professor and also as the president of NOW. Kind of interesting shenanigans back and forth, or tactical moves.
Maneuvers.
Yes.
Well, so there's two things really. One, what I've learned is that coalitions are strong, and people coming together and working together make a difference. So, you know, you saw in the package people who are there at the State House every single day advocating. So we have a lot of grassroots organizations like the Woman Project and like a lot of the work that Planned Parenthood is doing to get people to the State House. And then we also have people who are working on the legislation like ACLU and Planned Parenthood as well, and organizations like Rhode Island Now. So together, coalitions can really make their voices heard and have an impact legislatively at the State House.
Is this the leading conversation in terms of the progressive movements package this year? Are you satisfied in terms of the long list of things that you've been trying to get accomplished?
Well, I don't speak for the progressive movement as a whole. I had an op-ed in the Projo last month, which talked about the fact that this has become the #1 issue. I agreed with Speaker Mattiello that this particular issue of abortion rights took all the oxygen out of the room and meant that we didn't talk as much about other issues. And so I think it is really important and vital to the work of the state and other budgetary things that have already been touched upon this evening that we talk about abortion rights, that there's a full debate on the Senate floor, and that there's a vote, and then we can also address other issues as well.
And I would like to get a little running list of the current to-dos on this particular agenda, although the professor doesn't speak for all of it. When we come back, though, a preview of what might happen tomorrow and whether there's enough votes. Stay with us.
If the Supreme Court never overturns Roe versus Wade, and women in Rhode Island still have the opportunity, as we have for the last 46 years, to be able to have an abortion legally under the statutes of the state of Rhode Island, well, what's the rush? And I keep saying this. So if nothing happens, the Supreme Court might not decide this, maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years.
I think he makes an excellent point. And so the Senator Aptakis is actually going to introduce an amendment on the floor tomorrow, which is to add a trigger mechanism, and that is that this law will be held in abeyance until such time as Roe v. Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court, and then it would automatically kick in. I don't know about the trigger thing. We have a lot of sunset clauses where bills expire. I've never heard of a bill that gets passed and put in the holding box versus the shelf, which is where a lot of things go. What was the need here? Nothing's happened.
All you have to do is look around
Roe
the
v.
country.
Wade is the law of the land.
It is the law of the land right now, but there are explicit attempts right now going on in other state legislatures to take away access to safe and legal abortion.
But not ours.
That's true, but there are many other states.
This is a blue New England state,
So
not
why
a red Southern state.
You're right, this is a blue New England state. So in fact, this is part of the blue platform at both the national level and at the state level in Rhode Island, that the Democratic Party will fight, that's actually in the platform, will fight to protect women's access to abortion. So if it's just preserving the law of the land, this should be no big deal. Senator Raptakis, who has a D next to his name, should not have any problem voting for a bill that keeps the status quo, which is what the Reproductive Privacy Act does.
Yeah, well, listen, the Democratic Party is not monolithic.
Correct.
I mean, I grew up in a household of Democrats that walked on Kennedy's, thought that Kennedy walked on water. Irish Catholic Democrat pro-lifers. That's so this notion that Democrats, and I don't think that's, by the way, restricted to Catholic, I mean, or Irish. I mean, there's a lot of Catholic Democrats, I should say, there's a lot of Democrats who are pro-life and remain today who just feel beaten down and they have no place to go.
Well, we're not just a blue state. We're an extremely blue state. We essentially have, despite Senator Morgan and the package and all of that, we essentially have no solid organized Republican Party in the state, right? I think the Senate has 5 senators who are Republicans out of the 38. So that's fine. As you say, the Democratic Party is large and not everybody's going to agree on every single issue, but the fact that there are so many Democrats should say, well, sure, Senator Raptakis, if you need to vote your moral conscience, fine, but there are so many other people who are going to support this piece of legislation.
He also pointed to, and I think wisely so, that as you admitted, not that you've done anything that causes admission, but as you pointed out, the oxygen in the room has been sucked out, and he's sitting here with 4 or 5 or 6 financial issues he wants some attention for, namely indexing the minimum wage, if you will, to the CPI and and all sorts of other things. He wants criminal penalties for people who leave their children in cars unattended. There's all sorts of things going on.
Is to vote it out of committee and have a floor vote, right? Like, why extend it? Why be an obstructionist?
Because
Address it head on,
because
and let's move
that because there is a viable argument against this, that there's a pro-life movement who is entrenched and believes that it's wrong. And that predictably, that there's going to be a messy fight about it.
But as you said, that's been true for the past 50 years.
Sure, but we don't have anything happening at the U.S. Supreme Court that would indicate that this thing is going to be problematic. And if it was even so, it would be delegated and relegated back to the states for their own decision.
Well, look, the fact of the matter is that we still have on our law books a law that was passed shortly after Roe.
The Quick Child?
No, not the Quick Child. In the state of Rhode Island, right after Roe, the only time really the General Assembly has ever acted on abortion was to say abortion is illegal. That is still on our books. Now, there's a line in it because it's currently ruled unconstitutional, but it has not been repealed. And so that is part of what the Reproductive Privacy Act does. It repeals that bad law. It takes it off the books so that if anything happened, it doesn't immediately go into effect, which is what could happen. And look, Dan, I know you follow national news as well. Louisiana, Georgia, I could go on and on. Kentucky,
it's like another world.
But it's not, because this is all part of the states' rights movement, right? Like, this is how things work in our federal system, and those pieces of legislation were designed explicitly by their sponsors to make their way up to the Supreme Court to overturn Roe.
Right.
So.
Right.
Right.
Right. So we'll see one way or the other, even though what you've done is what you've done. I don't know. I think that I think this is a whole lot more about, well, I think you admit it. It's about a larger agenda than the real worry about Roe v. Wade, seems to me. So,
what is that? What is that agenda?
I don't know I don't even know how to describe it anymore. How do you describe it? You don't want full ownership of the progressive agenda, but there does seem to me to be, this. I think that this thing was part of a package, and I'm not sure the projection was that it would be such a hard fight in our own state legislature. And
oh no, this has been a fight for decades. I mean, The last time the House voted on anything related to abortion rights was 1993, and the Senate didn't take it up then. I mean, this is the first time the Senate has had a vote on an issue like this since the 1970s, on anything related to abortion, pro or con. So I think that the agenda is protecting women, keeping them safe. That concern has been heightened since the election of Donald Trump. That has to do with reproductive freedom, which doesn't just mean abortion. It also means, doulas. Like the doula bill was left out. The doulas were left out of the
What was the doula bill?
Budget. That women should be able to have paid access to a doula when they are in labor and giving birth, which really should be part of a pro-life movement, so that women who want to give birth are safe and have better outcomes and healthier outcomes.
Doulas should be health care covered, is that
Correct.
what you're saying?
So, and that disproportionately impacts women of color.
Most doulas are post-birth helpers.
No, they are when you're in labor and also post-birth.
No, I know a very active doula, and they're doulaing after birth.
As well
taking care of women,
as in labor,
especially those who are postpartum, which is a real serious issue.
I've done it twice, I know.
Done what? The doula thing or the baby thing?
The baby thing.
Yeah. You okay? Everything good?
I'm good. I mean, I'm a few years out. So.
Yeah, listen, gets way past my comfort zone and territory.
No, but that's part of the problem, right? Like,
yeah.
we do need to talk about this, and women's health care matters, right? And this is issues of fertility and infertility and all of these things.
Well,
and
at least
women's
we're
bodies
talking.
matter.
At least, one of the few things I actually agree with the mayor of Providence on is that we need to be much more open about menstrual cycles since we're at it, right? So,
and one thing I will say that was great that was in this budget, truly, is repealing the so-called tampon tax, because menstrual products are not a luxury; they're a necessity.
And I think they ought to be part of the public budget in restrooms. And there's kind of a history as to, I think. And I say this with all sincerity, I think things got messy. I think it became a public health hazard for some reason back in the day when people just said, you know what, we're not putting these things in bathrooms anymore. But I think we need a public health message and a publicly financed supply. I mean, TP and tampons all ought to be free in the bathrooms.
Right.
I agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we've solved all the world. Anything else? Well, look, we ought to be able to laugh. We ought to be able to take it seriously because these matters matter. I have 30 seconds. You got a preview for anything else that might happen in the session that's on the agenda that you don't want to completely own?
Well, I'm glad that universal pre-K is included in the budget. I would have liked to have seen more seats, but I'm very happy that we're going to be able to serve
I'll tell you,
more 4-year-olds.
I get it. You'll have to come back on this one because we have so much investment that we need K through 12 right now. But there's so much
this is
work
all
we
part
need
of
to
the
do.
same pipeline, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, is that it? Everything will be solved. The more pre-K we do, the better our performance will be?
Not everything, but it will help.
All right.
Early childhood, those early brains matters.
Good to see you.
Good to see
We'll
you.
follow you at the State House this week.
Thank you.
Final word when we come back. So tomorrow we'll take a look at this $10 billion budget that the Speaker says, if you got an idea as to what ought to be cut, call me. Call me. Then forget my number. But Ted Nisi and Steph Machado from Target 12 will target the budget right here on this set, so to speak. All right, tomorrow on the radio, 3 to 6, we'll talk to you then. And we wish you a good night. Take a summer walk. It's beautiful out there. Good night.